Você é um admirador de Elvis Presley? Conhece tudo sobre sua vida e carreira artística? Agora você pode demonstrar seus conhecimentos e ganhar um DVD player e outros prêmios. Oferecimento da MGM. A MGM convida você a participar da promoção O Rei Continua Vivo. De 11 a 24 de agosto, a MGM transmitirá uma programação especial dedicada ao rei do rock and roll. É só assistir e ficar atento às trivias sobre Elvis durante nossa programação. Conecte-se com casaclubetv.com e envie suas respostas a cada pergunta. Todas as respostas deverão ser enviadas até 24 de agosto deste ano, somente através da casaclubetv.com. Assista a MGM em agosto e ganhe um DVD player e outros prêmios do rei do rock and roll.
Congratulations.
Participe e conecte-se com casaclubetv.com. Em agosto, o rei continua vivo aqui na MGM. A MGM apresenta o bloco de programação MGM Apresentação Especial.
Sometimes people say to me, you know, God gave him his gift. Yeah, sometimes it can be a curse too, because it's a tough life to lead to be a superstar.
The minute the Colonel would come in, Elvis would, his whole character would change. He would get more uptight and more nervous and a little more, all of us girls kind of noticed that.
As long as Elvis didn't know what he was doing, Colonel Plunkett could do whatever he wanted.
It would not have come into his mind to say, wait a minute, I'm going to do what I want to do. He was very, very loyal to the guys, and they just were not capable of helping him with his problems.
There's nothing we can do. He has to want to do it in order for it to change, and he didn't want to do it.
Obviously, if he were mentally in good shape, he would be here today. But the real disease was drugs.
Elvis could have got drugs from anywhere, anytime, any place, because he was Elvis Presley.
I talked to him about seeing a shrink, number one, because we had talked about a lot of personal problems, and he was a very unhappy guy.
He was just a guy that had a great voice and a great smile and a great heart and a great sense of humor. But he was also very unsophisticated. So, you know, it was a bit much for him.
He didn't think he'd live very long in this life.
I met Elvis in Germany in 1959 when I was in the Army there in Friedberg. Him and I were stationed at the same base, and met him, became friends, instant friends. Before we left Germany, we left there in February of 1960. Just before we left, he asked what I was going to do when I got out of the Army. I asked him to go back to Chicago, just pick up where I left off. He said, why don't you come to work for me? I didn't have to think too long, and I said, okay, and that's how it started. I was with him for 17 years, dedicating all my time to him, and all of a sudden it ended. For about 3 months, I was fine. I was at work and busy. Then I realized, hey, he's not coming back anymore.
I left home when I was about 18, and I had moved to Las Vegas. I was dating a gambler, and he was gambling, and he didn't want me around. So he said, why don't you go see, Elvis? So I went and I saw him, and Joe Esposito brought me backstage, and Elvis threw a grape at me and hit me in the forehead, and then he had to come over and say hello, and then I left the dressing room, and he called and asked that I come over, and I did. I think that when I left him, he died within a year.
First time I met Elvis was at the Houston Astrodome on February 27th, 1970. It was his first live appearance outside Vegas in 9 years, and it was a big thrill for me. My father had met Elvis years before at the Eagles Hall in Houston, and my uncle had booked him down there back in 1955. Evidently, he remembered my dad. And I walked up to him and I said, hello, Mr. Presley. And he said, what's your name, kid? And I told him. After that, my father and I saw him again in Dallas in November 1971. 8 days later, my father and my mother and my sister were killed. They were hit by a train. And my grandmother contacted his office, and he found out about it, and he sent me a condolence card. And that's how it all started.
I was more or less in charge. I was his personal aide. I took care of everything for him, travel arrangements, paid the bills, kept receipts, and more or less was in charge of the guys that worked for him.
He was his father, brother, best friend, sense of humor, and pimp. He was all those things to Elvis.
I was excited that when he got married, I was the best man at his wedding. That was a big highlight of my life with him. Elvis was my friend first and my boss second. He was a wonderful person, very considerate, very generous, would give me things, paid for everything, and he was just a nice guy. He liked people to enjoy his money with him.
He was, tossing his scarves out, and he threw this one scarf out to this little girl, and he caught in the corner of his eye that a woman, like in her 40s, had grabbed the scarf, and he just kind of shrugged and he looked down at it. He was, really disgusted about it, and then he said, "Come up here, little girl." He said, "I want you to have this," and he took off this $100,000 diamond-encrusted cross, and he put it around her neck. And he told a security guard to the side of the stage, he says, "You stand by her for the whole show and make sure she makes it to the car with that cross. Don't let anybody take it away from her."
Elvis was a compulsive person. He would buy things on a whim. And then when he bought something, he'd buy it for everybody else too. If he bought a new car, and he said, "Well, I think my friends need new cars too," so he'd buy everybody a new car. I was in Vail, Colorado. And while I was there, he said, "Joe, look at that Rolls Royce. Wouldn't you like that?" I said, "No, I don't want that car." I said, "I'll cause trouble in the group, and I don't want you to go out and buy 10 Rolls Royces." So he said, "I got to get you something." I said, "Don't give me anything. Just give my girlfriend Shirley. She doesn't have a car." He gave her a brand new Eldorado. And he would do this periodically with a lot of things: jewelry, cars, horses, trucks, everything he did. That's the way he was.
Threw a party in the county jail. The prison band was there, they began to wail. The band was jumping and the joint began to swing. You should have heard the knocked out jailbird sing and rock.
With Joe Esposito managing his personal affairs, Elvis returned to Hollywood to resume his spectacular career. And he found that during the 2 years he'd been away, he'd become a bigger star than he was when he left.
Elvis was a wreck about acting, and I knew how he felt because he was still so insecure about his acting. He was so solid and secure as a performer, as an entertainer, and when it came to acting, he would start telling jokes about himself. Before you could put him down, he put himself down.
He got very tired of doing the movies that he was doing.
Step right up to the load machine.
I can do better than that.
Elvis Presley and I did a movie called Spin Out, which was basically your musical about race cars. How those two things came together, I don't know. I guess because of Elvis.
That's a goal. Scoot before you lose control.
Elvis was offered the role in Midnight Cowboy as Joe Buck.
Where's that Joe Buck? Where's that Joe Buck? Where's that Joe Buck? Yeah, where's that Joe Buck?
And it would have been a challenging role for Elvis, but Colonel Parker said no deal.
Hold my hand and we'll halfway there.
West Side Story would have been a great challenge for Elvis, and I'm sure he would have met it, but the Colonel refused to let him do it. Robert Mitchum came up to see Elvis at his hotel suite, and he asked him to do Thunder Road. He had written it with him in mind, and again, Elvis wanted to do it, but the Colonel said no.
Yeah, baby, the rain must fall. Baby, the wind.
Maybe The Rain Must Fall was a perfect vehicle for Elvis, about a young boy from the South singing, and he wanted to do it, but the Colonel just wouldn't let him.
Kazan wanted to use him in a movie with Natalie Wood, and he was not allowed to do that.
In 1975, Elvis was asked to play Rudolph Valentino in a feature film at $2.5 million, and why the Colonel said no is a mystery.
He was offered the Chris Christopherson role in the remake of The Star is Born.
Elvis was up at the Las Vegas Hilton, and he had just finished a show, and Barbra Streisand came up to visit with Elvis, and they talked to Elvis about Elvis co-starring with Streisand, and Elvis really wanted to do it. For just a while there, he had this spark of really doing something really important in film, and it was his chance. He wanted to do it, but Red West told me, he says, the next day, he was like, okay, Elvis, we're going to do A Star is Born, you know, it's going to be like the old days, and you're going to be better than ever, and Elvis said, well, I can't do it. He said, what do you mean you can't do it? He said, I talked to the Colonel, and he says, I can't do it.
By the time he did The Trouble with Girls and Change of Habit in 1969, Hollywood and everybody else considered Elvis Presley movies to be a joke.
Frankie and me, we are lovers. Oh, Lordy, how we can love.
At the time, you really didn't want to do an Elvis film. It wasn't like really a step up in your career or whatever, you know. But they paid me money. So I kind of suddenly felt like that was a step up in my career.
This is my lucky day. Love's in the cards, I'd say.
It's sad in a way that he never had a chance to do what he really thought he could do.
Go eat and drink and feast. Go east, young man.
He could have gone on to be a really good actor, as well as always a performer, and probably found more satisfaction and peace in his life.
Every film seemed to use exactly the same story as the last one, transferred to a different setting. It had a dozen or so songs that didn't sound any different than the tunes in his previous film. His movie box office had nosedived.
I got news for you, baby. I did 29 pictures like that.
Elvis knew that it was time to reinvent his career.
When he started back in '69, when we opened up in Las Vegas, he hadn't performed in 8 years. And in Vegas, the first time he failed, because people didn't care for him in Vegas that time. But in '69, when he walked on that stage and I saw that audience give him a standing ovation, all these big invited guests, which usually just sit and don't move, you know, all these people from show business all standing up applauding him, and you could just see the look on his face. just felt so good that it was received this way. And they stood up through almost the whole show. He walked off that stage. He must have been 10 feet off the ground.
One night with you.
He was so thrilled. I saw tears in his eyes because he was so thrilled. And that was, I get goosebumps thinking about it right now, in fact.
There's no normal woman that can't get excited when he walks on. He's so dynamic.
Love me tender, love me true, never let me go.
My daughter went to see the show Tuesday night, and she got kissed by Elvis, and she hasn't washed her face since.
He knew after that show that he needed to get on stage, and that's when we started touring again.
Elvis, why did you start making public appearances again?
I just missed it. I missed the closeness of an audience, of a live audience. So just as soon as I got out of the movie contracts, I started to do live performances again.
When Elvis started to tour, he broke house records wherever he appeared.
It's been a long time, baby.
Late in 1972, Marty Pasetta, who was a very well-known producer, approached Elvis about doing Aloha from Hawaii, which eventually would be seen by over 1 billion people all over the earth.
The Aloha from Hawaii special, live around the world by satellite. I mean, these are events that nobody else ever did before. He did. He took it, he went out and did it with heart.
Thank you very much.
But Marty Pasetta told Elvis, he said, if we're going to do this show, Elvis, you're going to have to do something for me. And Elvis said, what's that? He says, you're going to have to lose at least 30 pounds. And he says, I'll lose it. And sure enough, Elvis did. And that's why I said if Elvis had a challenge, he could meet it head on.
The story of Elvis Presley is almost Faustian, because the man who's most responsible for his rise to superstardom is also the person who is most responsible for his fall from grace, and in a way, his death.
Something was going on there. I don't know. That was a strange relationship. We all kind of talked about it, you know. My heart bleeds for what happened to him. It shouldn't have happened to him because he was too good of a human being.
The Colonel was more or less a presence. What his relationship personally was with Elvis, I don't know. But even when he wasn't around, he was there.
2 years I was there, and I met the Colonel maybe twice. So it seemed to me that he wasn't all that concerned, just so that, you know, the money was coming in, basically.
Elvis's fabled manager, Colonel Tom Parker, was not the person that he claimed to be. He was actually a Dutch citizen, Andries van Kuzik, who had entered the United States illegally in 1929 and lived here without benefit of a valid passport. And that was one of the reasons why he wouldn't let Elvis tour, because he was afraid that if he left the country, he wouldn't be allowed back in. Before he became a personal manager, Parker worked the carnival circuit. He could always spot a winner.
He's back. He's ready.
But once he started managing Elvis, he dropped all of his other clients because he had Elvis exclusively, and he was getting 50% of his earnings.
Don't leave me now.
Colonel Parker took him off of Sun Records and put him on RCA. Gave him incredible TV exposure, put him on the Dorsey shows, and then on Ed Sullivan. And once Elvis played Ed Sullivan, it was all over.
I wanted to say to Elvis Presley in the country that this is a real, decent, fine boy. We want to say that we've never had a pleasanter experience on our show with a big name than we've had with you. You're thoroughly all right. So now, let's have a tremendous hand for a very nice person.
Colonel Parker was a tremendous gambler. I mean, when Elvis was working at the Hilton Hotel, he lost literally millions of dollars. And that's why he booked
Elvis in there a lot of times. And I don't think Elvis ever really knew how much money that was being taken from him. First of all, you know, Colonel Parker was an equal partner with him. So right off the bat, he was taking 50%. Plus, who knows if he ever gave any accounting for the stuff that he sold. You know, his albums and his personal appearances and stuff, and T-shirts, and amounted to literally hundreds of thousands of dollars every week. And most of that was cash.
One day I was sitting in Colonel Tom's office at MGM, and I was getting ready to sign my contract. And Time magazine called, and they were asking for permission to put Elvis on the cover of Time magazine. And Colonel Tom said, well, fine, that'll be $25,000. And Time magazine supposedly said, you don't understand, we're a help, we're a big help. And Colonel Tom said, you don't understand, we don't need your help.
Colonel screened all the songs that came Elvis's way, which is why there are so few choice songs in any of Elvis's movies. Parker insisted that he get 50% of the publisher's share and 50% of the writer's share of these songs. And that's why the top songwriters in Hollywood didn't submit to Elvis. And it's also why the Colonel discouraged Elvis from doing dramatic motion pictures, because there's no songs in a dramatic motion picture.
All these teams of writers would submit their songs, and I'm lucky enough to have gotten 12 movies. Rockahula Baby was probably the most important. Do the Clam and Spin Out. I Got Lucky, Beyond the Bend, Cindy, Cindy, Big Love, Big Heartache, you know, it was fun.
The Colonel had definitive ideas about what he wanted Elvis to do, which in many cases Elvis was not happy with, although he didn't fight him on a lot of them.
He was interested in his own success and letting Colonel Parker make all the decisions for him, I guess.
But you have to understand how he was brought up. He had a certain amount of loyalty, plus a contract to Colonel Parker. He also had been taught to say yes ma'am and no ma'am, and he felt that he had a moral as well as legal obligation.
I think probably Elvis should be very happy that he met the Colonel. He helped him a lot. They were a pretty good team. It worked pretty good for both of them.
Well, I had moved to Las Vegas. I left home when I was about 18, and I had moved to Las Vegas because a couple of friends of mine lived there. And I was dating a gambler, and he was gambling, and he didn't want me around. So he said, why don't you go see, Elvis? I went with a girlfriend, and we had seats way. Elvis was about 3 inches tall. But you could still see, even from that distance, you could still see the spirit in his eyes, that thing that he had. When he would meet a girl, there was a consensus among the guys that worked for him. I think they did like a score from 1 to 10, and I rated high. One of the most important things is, could you take care of him, or were you just there for the fun of it? Because part of the job was taking care of him. The romance was short-lived, and the taking care of was the most part of the relationship. It was more, let's keep him alive than going to the movies. I went to Los Angeles with him and spent time in his Los Angeles home, and I went to Graceland and spent time there. But it was a gradual thing. I started out to be a girl, but right from the beginning, it was a new car and a new wardrobe in week 1. And I don't think that happened with every girl. As a matter of fact, I'm sure that it didn't.
Even though she was treated royally, Sheila Ryan, like those who came before her, learned very quickly that Elvis was anything but monogamous. In fact, Linda Thompson was still very much a part of his life.
I was real young, and my father left, and I didn't have a lot of self-esteem. And it was kind of an out-of-body experience to begin with. You know, what Elvis? Hello, you know? It was a strange thing. I mean, how do you end up dating Elvis? I mean, it's so surreal. So the fact that there's another girl, what am I going to complain? Now, Linda, on the other hand, she did plenty of complaining. She was a Miss America or a Miss Tennessee or whatever, and she had parents that nurtured her, and so she had a sense of herself, whereas I was just a little bit of a free spirit and not too demanding. Mind you, I'm from the Midwest, a small town. It's a Cinderella kind of story, and all of a sudden here I am, sort of like queen for a day, you know, or queen for a year. I think that when I left him, he died within a year. Within a year. Because I was still very close with Joe. Joe and I had become very good friends because when Elvis had to have Linda there, because Linda and I dated him at the same time, it was sort of like Joe's job to take me to Hawaii or whatnot.
Well, that's the way it was with Elvis, with any woman he ever dated. Yes, he may like them more than others, but when they left, he always wanted somebody else. So that's how he handled it. You know, he could love somebody, but yet he had to have comfort of another woman around him. I think Elvis's fascination with women started because of his mother. You know, he's very close to his mother, and he always had his mother there for his talking and problems. He felt more comfortable with women. He could sit and relate to a woman a lot more than he could with a guy. He could sit and tell them about his problems. He could talk about things to them, and around men, he had to be macho.
I think he loved women. He loved his mother, and from what I've learned over the years, if a man loves his mother, you stick around him. If he doesn't, you leave right away because, you know, that's the deal. You know, I mean, if a guy doesn't love their mother, they're not going to love any other woman.
I think he said he was on a ship when he found out his mom died. And he could not show his feelings in front of the other guys. He said at night, after everybody, he made sure everybody was asleep, he put all the pillows over his head and cried for the loss of his mom, because that was a very painful thing for him.
Elvis's heart was a million pieces. His mother was his life. He did everything for her. He called her Sadnin, which was a nickname. He loved his mother more than anything in the world.
Is your wife Priscilla with you?
No, she's not.
It really tore him up when they parted. I don't think that Elvis really thought that it would ever happen, but it did.
He would say that he didn't love her, that he made a promise when she was very young, and he kept his promises, and so he married her. But yet, he had a certain sense of ownership that I think, you know, destroyed him. And the fact that she would go on without him, his ego could not handle that.
Well, you know, when he broke up with Priscilla, it was a very emotional thing for him because, you know, here I am, this big star and sex symbol supposed to be, and my wife leaves me. It bothered him tremendously for his ego and his own self. He could understand why.
And his marriage, and that didn't work, and he loved the little girl, the baby, he treasured.
I have mixed feelings about what Priscilla has done and what her motivation was, and you know how much love was there. And I have a lot of different information, some from Elvis, some from friends of Elvis, and some from time that I spent with her. So I know different sides of her, and some are good and some are not, just like anyone.
There was a time where he talked to Red West, and he wanted him to go shoot Mike Stone. Mike Stone was the one that she had an affair with. And just as Red was making the arrangements to do it, Elvis said, Red, forget about it. He said, it's just too heavy. Because Elvis realized what he was doing, but he was hurt that much.
What's a man gonna say? His wife runs off with somebody. He's living a double standard, like anyone in his position would. It was okay for him to be with anybody and everybody that he felt like being with, but when she sort of became independent and fell in love with someone else, it killed him. I mean, he couldn't deal with it. So what was he gonna say? I still love her? No.
Linda Thompson was a lot of things to Elvis. I mean, Linda was his lover, his friend, and his nurse. I don't know what Elvis would have done without Linda the last few years of his life. Sheila, I believe, was good for Elvis, and I think that he really, really cared about Sheila an awful lot. And why they parted, I really can't say.
You want to be the number one girl, and I was almost there. And going to Graceland, nobody got to go to Graceland unless you were then the number one girl, so I guess Linda got down to the number 2 slot. I don't know if that was her doing. I didn't talk a lot about Linda at all, what happened with them. It wasn't a conversation that happened, I just did what I was told, and when he would talk about marriage, and I just thought it was pretend, I thought the whole thing was pretend. I know Linda wanted to marry him, and my father wanted me to marry him because he was interested in the financial aspects and the fame and all of that, but he wasn't up all night losing sleep and breaking out in hives and watching a man die. What did I want to marry the man to watch him die? No, I wanted to leave. The first time I turned him down, it was because I had fallen in love with someone else, so I never said no to him. I met the father of my child 1 week, and we spent 5 days together on our first date. And I was seriously looking for helicopters because, if he couldn't find me, that was never anything that happened. I was always accessible. And I said, I have to go home to deal with this because I know that he's calling every night. And so I went and spent the night at my apartment, and he called at 4 o'clock in the morning and said, you've got your horse at Graceland, and there's no more Linda, it's just you and I, and just, promised me the world, which was what, I had kind of wanted all along, but it was too late. He had to be a recluse. He had to stay in, and he played with it. He had fun with it.
And I said, Elvis, let's take a walk. We'll quietly, and the office is buzzing, and we'll take a walk up the street. He said, I can't take a walk in the street. Are you kidding, Finkel? He said, I'll get mobbed. I can't do that. I said, Elvis, it's 1 o'clock in the morning. Take a walk with me. So went down that elevator, got on the street, walked up the street. People passed us. Nobody said one word or looked at it. They could say, oh, well, that looks like Elvis, but they wouldn't believe that he was out in the street with some guy. So when we came back to the office, he said, gee, that was wonderful. We got to do that every night. Walking in the street was a big thing for him,
I'm sure that Elvis is sharing a bed with his mother until he was well into his teens didn't help his sexual psyche much.
Was he good in bed? He was a great kisser. He was a great kisser. He was very romantic. Some things were a little bit unusual, but there were things that kept him from a normal through line of action in sex. He had phobias and fears of getting women pregnant. It was difficult for him to, I don't want to say it. It was difficult for him to complete the sexual act. You know, he would have to take measures not to get someone pregnant. So there you have it. He still had sexual drive. It was not that fun for me because it had to be spontaneous for him, but it wasn't spontaneous for me, you know. So it was like, okay, he would take the Valium to put him to sleep, and that would make him very amorous. And it would be like, okay, Sheila, Sheila, you're on, boom. And I'm like, you know, and I've been traveling, I've been on the road, I was exhausted. I didn't have 15 people taking care of me. So, you know, it wasn't always fun. And I had this terrible snore at the time. And I fell asleep, and he called the doctor. And he said, Dr. Canner, you know, Sheila, my girlfriend, she's snoring. Yeah, okay, send her right over. So he just took the tonsils out on the spot. So it was just a horrible experience.
Elvis and guns. I've seen him shoot out a TV set. Dr. Nick, who was my doctor for a while, had a joke, and he said that there was like a TV graveyard in the back of Graceland, you know, because he shot so many sets out.
I rented this big house for Elvis in Bel Air, California back in 1961. Beautiful house, big swimming pool in the backyard. So we're sitting around the pool one day, and somebody had a camera. They dropped a flash bulb, the old flash bulb cameras in those days, into the pool, and it was floating on top of the water. He said, give me a BB gun. I have a BB gun in the house. Go get it. And he shoots at this thing, and it exploded. He said, throw some more in there. So he said, there he started shooting these things. So he said, this is fun. Go out and buy some BB guns. Go get a bunch of them, get a lot of BBs, and get a bunch of flash bulbs. So we started target practicing. Now this stuff is all blowing up and sinking in the bottom of the pool. Well, we went from flash bulbs to little floating boats, to little battery-operated boats. We started blowing up everything inside the swimming pool. By that evening, the bottom of the pool must have had about 6 inches of junk in the bottom. He didn't realize it took me 4 days to get the pool clean. It cost me about $600 to have it cleaned after that. And we spent about $1,000 in junk to do this, but he loved to do this kind of stuff.
Elvis always watched the Johnny Carson show. And on his birthday one night, Johnny Carson came on and said, well, Elvis is fat and 40. And Elvis blew out the screen and said, I don't know why I ever liked that son of a bitch.
Oh my God, look at it, he blew up a television. So what? He didn't buy another television. That's just the way he was. Well, getting into drugs became slowly. It all actually started from the very beginning was in the Army. The Army, when you're on scouts and maneuvers, they give you these little white dextroamphetamine sulfate. It was like a speed pill to keep you awake. So he took a couple of these and he liked how it made him feel. So when he got out of the service, he took a bunch of them with him. Somebody gave him a bunch of them and he took them with him. So once in a while he started getting tired if we were up late. The next morning he got up early, you were groggy. Took one of those, it pepped you up. So little by little, you find out about other things and you start taking those. And then after you take these too long, you take too many, you can't go to sleep at nighttime. So you turn around and take a sleeping pill. And then it becomes a vicious circle.
Drug use is insidious. You start out with a little bit works, so why not more works better? By the time I met him, he was already at the more works better stage. He used a lot of drugs to sleep and a lot of drugs to put him out right away so that he could rest before a show, and then drugs to wake him up right away so that he can get busy before a show, but he still had drive.
When I got sick here in the hotel, I got sick here that one night, I had 102 temperature. They wouldn't let me perform. From 3 different sources I heard I was strung out on heroin. So I told him earlier, and don't you get offended, ladies and gentlemen, I'm talking to somebody else. If I find or hear the individual that has said that about me, I'm going to break your goddamn neck, you son of a bitch.
I was to never take heroin. He tried cocaine a couple times, didn't like it. It just made him really weird. Pain medication, all the pain medications, Demerol, Percodan, even Dilaudid, all the pain medications. He did take those. Those are strong pain medications. And sleeping pills, all the sleeping pills, whatever can knock him out. It took a lot to knock him out. Even the strong sleeping pills, he'd be up in 3 hours. He could not, as long as I've known him, all those years, he could not sleep.
Has this sudden notoriety affected your sleep, your appetite, or the size of your head?
Not the size of my head. It's affecting my sleep.
How much sleep do you get?
Oh, I average about 4 or 5 hours a night, I guess.
Is that enough?
No, it's really not, but I'm used to it, and I can't sleep any longer.
So, after a while, that's what happens. You have to keep taking these things. You want, your body says, hey, I need another one. And he just couldn't handle it. The last couple of years was tough. It was really tough. I mean, some of the concerts, we were surprised we got through. I was afraid he was going to faint or fall down or trip or something like that on stage, but you couldn't get him to stop the show. He wouldn't do that, so you got to sit there and keep your fingers crossed, and he got through it. But he just did it automatically. He just went up and did what he had to do.
I've laughed and cried. I've had my fill, my share of losing.
When you're on drugs, your mood change a lot. And Elvis, to me, Elvis was not himself when he's on drugs. Elvis is a different person. And he would change. He would have flashes of mood. He could be mean in a minute and fine the next.
Whenever I would make any demands at all, we would fight, and he'd say, Joe, get the plane, she's leaving. Things like that were difficult in his moods and his anger.
I mean, there was he tried to hit me with an ashtray one time in Las Vegas. There was a charity event going on, telethon, at the Stardust Hotel. And he said, I'm going to go over there. I said, Elvis, you can't go over there and walk out in this telecast, because he wasn't in good shape. And I wasn't going to let him go there. And he said, I'm going. I said, Elvis, you can't go. Do me a favor. Just don't go. You don't need to go. We got a big argument. And he grabbed an ashtray off the bar. We were talking. He said, I'm going to go, damn. I'm going to hit you with this damn ashtray. And I said, I looked at him, I said, you really going to hit me with that ashtray? And he looked at it for a minute, and he got mad, and he went back in the bedroom. And he didn't come out. So he didn't go. But he would do those things, but if you really got through to him, he would sit and think for a minute, what am I doing here? I'm not going to hit anybody. But he had those moods, it changes, but that's what drugs do to people. I mean, they're not the same anymore.
I was so exhausted on a tour, and I called the doctor that was attending the tour, Dr. Ghanem, and I said, his first name is Elias. I said, Elias, I'm exhausted. Look at me, I'm a wreck. I just need to get home for a few days. Let's say that I have a lump in my breast, So he said, well, I'll have to examine you, and we laughed, and he did. And he said, he went to Elvis and told Elvis that I had to go home, and Elvis did not want me to go home. I mean, we were at breakfast, and he was angry. We were on tour. He knew I was leaving, and he threw his bacon, and he threw his eggs, and I ran into the bathroom, and he ran after me, and it was one of those accordion doors, in a hotel, the cheap accordion doors. I had really no protection whatsoever, and boom, he comes through it, and just stopped himself in the nick of time.
One time, Ginger's told a story. Ginger was 19 years old when she met him. Elvis had the idea that she was fooling around with her high school boyfriend, and of course Ginger said that she wasn't, but Elvis had his idea. That's what was going on. When Elvis had something on his mind, that's the way it was. So she was going out to her car, and they had a little argument, and he took his Colt 45 out, shot it in the air, and he said, "Ginger, if you leave, don't worry about it, don't think about coming back." And she just went to her car. She was going to get in. She was ignoring him, and he shot the tires out of the car. And he stomped off and went up to his room, and she said she found him, and he was hiding behind his bed. He was laughing.
One time we had to go to a court thing in Lake Tahoe, and he was just, when he was angry, everybody was just freaked and frightened and sweating, and when he was angry it was difficult. He was pretty much like a wind-up doll, and there was a doctor there, and he was a good doctor, Dr. Nicopoulos. But in order to have someone perform the way that he did and do the amount of shows that he did, he would, like I said, have to be medicated, and that would then cause him to be drowsy and hungover, and then henceforth angry and gaining weight because sleeping pills make you hungry.
Elvis had insomnia really bad, and so at certain times he'd sleep for days, and that's one of the reasons that Elvis picked up weight, because he had eaten before he went to sleep, and he'd sleep for days.
The most important job was to watch him sleep. When he got his food, it was late at night, and he had already taken his meds for sleep, and so he would tend to fall asleep while he was eating. So you would have to make sure that he didn't fall asleep with a mouthful of food, to make sure that he didn't die.
No, he didn't throw up. He just fell asleep. He had food in his mouth. He could hardly breathe. He had to take the food out of his mouth. Yeah, put your finger in his mouth, take the food out. Yeah. Those are things I don't like to talk about.
Anybody that can't sleep and is dying and can see it and halfway knows it and can't make a turnaround, obviously if he were mentally in good shape, he would be here today. But the real disease was drugs. The only person that could have stopped it was the Colonel, because he was kind of like God, I mean, he came in and whisked in and whisked out, but you could see that this was not a healthy situation, and Joe Esposito did everything in his power to talk to Elvis.
We all talked to him. We all said, "You got a problem here. Let's straighten yourself out." Sometimes he'd listen to you. He'd sit there, "Okay, I'm going to do this." And sometimes he would get mad at you. He'd say, "Hey, listen, guys, there's a door. If you don't like it, you can leave. You don't have to stay here." He says, "I can do what I want to do," and it's true. There's nothing we can do. He has to want to do it in order for it to change, and he didn't want to do it.
I would be in charge of the medicine box, and sometimes we would try to fill some of the capsules with sugar and make him think he was getting a sleeping med when in fact it was a placebo. And so it was all a game. Let's pretend Elvis isn't dying,
During those last couple of years, he did stop and change. He'd clean himself up. He'd be straight as an arrow. He'd be great. He'd go for 30, 40 days like that.
He wasn't using drugs, and he had a few clear days, and I thought, this is great. But then within a few days, boom, it was the sleeping, all day long, and angry, and
all of a sudden he'd go back into depression or something.
He told me that, he said, I would get so depressed I'd stay in my room and lock the door. And he said sometimes my dad would worry and he'd come up and leave a tray at the door.
Toward the end, when he was bloated and heavy, he looked terrible. A lot of times he looked terrible. It wasn't that he was mentally disturbed or anything like that. He was just not in good shape. And when you take that kind of medication, you don't even know what you look like. You look in the mirror, you think you look fine. those were really hard moments, you know, to see Elvis like that, you know, because I see him, I picture the way he was all the time, and that was not him. It's not the same guy I knew on stage, not my friend.
We didn't really talk about how serious it was, but it was.
Sometimes people say to me, you know, God gave him this gift. Yeah, sometimes it can be a curse too, because it's a tough life to lead to be a superstar.
We'd sit up in his bedroom and he would look and he'd go, who am I? You know, he'd sort of like pinch himself. You know, he didn't do any of this. None of this was of his doing. All he did was sing. And, you know, he was just a guy. You know, he was just a guy that had a great voice and a great smile and a great heart and a great sense of humor. But he was also very unsophisticated. So, you know, it was a bit much for him.
Elvis always wondered why everybody liked him. He couldn't understand it, and that was one of his mysteries in life over the years. He couldn't understand why he was the one picked to do this. He was in his 40s. It wasn't going to be like when I'm getting older. Am I going to be still loved by all my fans? And that bothers entertainers tremendously. They all go through this at one time or another. A lot of them survive and some don't. Elvis didn't survive.
He told Ginger, he said that he was going into the bathroom to read. And she said, don't fall asleep. And he said, I won't. And those were the last words that Elvis ever said.
We were getting ready to leave on tour that day to go to Portland, Maine. And I was there in the afternoon getting everybody ready, organized, and the wardrobe guy, Al Strada, was there getting his clothes together, and the phone call came from upstairs. Ginger, Elvis's girlfriend at the time, said Elvis had fainted in the bathroom. So Al ran upstairs, and then I get a phone call 2 seconds later. Al said, come upstairs, I need your help. So I ran upstairs, and I go into the bathroom, and Elvis is on the ground. The minute I touched him, I knew he was dead. Turned him over, laid him out, grabbed the phone, called for an ambulance, and Al called the doctor while I was trying to help him. I couldn't resuscitate him at the time. I mean, I couldn't give him mouth-to-mouth. Everybody said I could give him mouth-to-mouth. I couldn't. His mouth was sealed shut. And I was beating on his chest trying to get his heart going, but I knew it was hopeless. I was just sitting there waiting for the rest of the people to show up.
When Elvis died, his heart was 2 times its normal size. He nearly bit his tongue in half. And there was blood. And according to the paramedics, you know, they had to break his knees when they brought him onto the stretcher because rigor mortis had set in.
Got him in the ambulance, took him to the hospital, and they took him to the emergency room, and they worked on him in there. About 30 minutes later, they came out and told us that he was gone. That was tough, real tough to accept.
I said what I said to Joe when Joe said, you know, Elvis is dead. I said, almost like it didn't affect me. Like I said, you knew it was going to happen, and he said, yeah, I guess I did, but I really didn't really believe it. And so my reaction was to turn off the television, turn off the radio, not go to the newsstands, not go to the grocery stores, and just I slept with my light on. I figured he was going to come and visit me or something. I don't know. I was afraid of ghosts. And so my reaction was to ignore it. I didn't want to deal with it. I wouldn't even go to his funeral. I don't think I could have been any help to anybody there. Joe would have just felt pressure to put me up. I didn't want to deal with Priscilla and Linda and every other girl that thought she was the only one. You know, I didn't want to be a part of the drama.
When Joe Esposito called Colonel Parker to inform him of Elvis's death, the colonel replied, "This doesn't change a thing. I'll still get my 50%.
I wish he was still here. Yeah, you know, it's difficult to lose someone that you've been intimate with. Well, know it's difficult to lose anyone that you love, you know.
It was devastation, no two ways about her, but our whole lives had changed. Now, I was with her for 17 years, dedicating all my time to him, and all of a sudden it ended. It was like I went away and Elvis was someplace else, like he wasn't dead. So that bothered me tremendously. For about 3 months, I was fine. I was working busy. Then I realized, hey, he's not coming back anymore. There'll never be another Elvis. I mean, I work with some great stars, and they're all nice, and all they want to do is talk about Elvis to me, about him, which is great, because I respect them, because they all said if it wasn't for Elvis, we wouldn't be here. My life has changed completely, yeah, but I still think about him every day.